Welcome to Stitch Crazy. Today we're going to take blue jeans and we're going to make a wall hanging like this one hanging behind me. And so what we're going to need for our project today are an assortment of blue jeans. So find all the scraps of blue jeans that you can. And what the supplies we're going to need today, of course, is our sewing machine, our cutting board, our ruler, a rotary cutter for cutting the fabric, or scissors, different scraps of blue jeans so we can cut the squares the size that we want. We're going to need, with this particular one, I'm using iron-on to take fabric and iron it on and paint it. So we'll need some iron-on interfacing and markers, paints, embellishments. So those are kind of the list of the different supplies that you're going to need. Now that can vary depending on what you're going to, or how you're going to embellish your quilt. Okay, so on this particular quilt, I've used conchos, and I've used the iron-on with the paints. I've used beads. I've used pieces of suede, and then just different fabric I've cut out and ironed on. So it just depends what designs you want on your quilt. This one happens to be Western, so that's my theme for this one today. Okay, so once we, the first thing we'll need to decide is how big do we want our quilt or wall hanging. This one is 5 squares by 5 squares. I've used 6.5-inch squares, so when you sew them together, their finished size is 6. I've also used strips of fabric. The finished size on those strips are 2, so I cut those 2.5-inch strips, okay? And so depending on the size you want is how many squares that you're gonna cut. So today, to save some time, I've already cut my squares and I've already cut my strips, but I will kind of go over the basics on how to do that, okay? So first we're gonna take our blue jeans and we're going to cut them apart. Okay, so on this one here, this pair of jeans, we're going to cut off the bottom. So we're going to cut off the seam on the bottom, just to kind of give you a basic on how to cut your jeans apart in case you haven't watched any of the other programs. And so we're going to cut the seam on the bottom off. Okay, and then we're going to take our jean and we're going to cut the seams apart. So then just take your jean, lay it down, lay it as flat as you can, and then just take your scissors and cut the seam. Okay, do that on both sides of your jeans so that you get a piece of denim like this. And so the width of this, it depends on the size of your block. This one here you could probably get an 8.5-inch block out of. There's some you can get a 6.5, and if you use like a children's jeans, you're gonna of course have a smaller block. So it depends on what size you want your blocks, on what size a piece of jeans that you need. Okay, so for today, I have cut out 6.5-inch squares. Okay, so then what I decided to use the lighter jeans for my blocks so that you can see my designs, and I've decided to use the darker strips, which I've pre-cut these strips into 2.5-inch strips, and I did the darker so that, like on this one here, you can see it's lighter and then the darker strips. Okay, so once you've gotten all your squares cut out, then we have to decide, and also another thing that you're going to need for supplies is maybe like a book with embroidery designs or a pattern of some sort that you can cut out. So like an example, I've used this embroidery design and I've made it into a pattern, and I took the design and cut it out, and then I laid it on my blue jean, and then in this particular case, I just took a permanent marker and I went all the way around the design. And also for this one, I even embellished it inside. I used the red marker to make a little red on this. Now you can take this and cut fabric out like I have done here. I've taken fabric and cut it out and then embellished it with paint. This has gold paint and then the black around it to seal it. Okay, so there's many different ways that we can embellish our blocks. This one here, to save time, I've taken this fabric that has Western designs, and then I've ironed on the iron-on interfacing on the back, and then we can cut them out into these little pieces, and then we take those pieces and we iron them on to our square. Okay, so then when we have, there's another sample of an iron-on. Here's a sample of how we've used an embroidery design. Some people have embroidery machines. You can also take an embroidery design and iron it on or stitch it on. You can do that. So I've gotten a few samples of the embroidery. This one here, I've just taken a piece of blue jeans and I've cut out a horseshoe shape. I put the iron on and then I've embellished it with paint. Okay, so that would be our first thing, is to embellish all of our squares. Okay, and so here's another sample where I've taken this pattern, I drew it on with marker, and then I used paint to embellish it. Okay, so that would depend on the supplies that you need and how you're going to embellish your squares. Okay, now once we have gotten all of our blocks made, embellished, ironed on, painted, I'm going to take one of these iron on and I'm going to show you how I take the paint. Now when I use paint, you probably want to put something underneath it in case, so that you don't hurt your table or mark up your table. I'm going to you can take your paints, and on this one, decide what color that you want to do. And because the hat is gold, I'm going to kind of go around it in gold. And so then I'm going to take my paint and I'm going to go all the way around the edge with the paint. I'll show you here what I'm going to do. And this will seal it a little bit more. So I'm just going to take and get my paint to the bottom of my thing. Okay, now once I start, I'm just going to follow it around my square. And you can always add a little more if you don't think it's got enough around it. And it's just basically to seal the edge so that if it ever gets washed, which this probably will not, but then it won't fray, is the point of it. Okay. Now when you use these paints, you're going to have to let it sit for around 24 hours because you want it completely dry before you add it to your quilt. Okay, so that didn't take me very long, and I just went around the whole square, and then now we'll need to just let it sit for 24 hours. So we'll just put it over here. Now, you may need embroidery floss, depending if you're going to embroider on your block. Okay, and okay, this one here, I have taken 4 squares and put them together, and on this bottom one I took this design and I used some embroidery, and then I've also used paints, so you can mix and match for your design. Here I've used an embroidery block, and then I used studs, and then I did the block with the paint. So you can make your quilt however you want. So now once I get my blocks made, I'm gonna make it into either, this is a rectangle one, and then the other one that I did for today's show, I just put 4 pieces together and I made a square. So you can either make a larger one like this one, a smaller one, or a long one. So depending on what space you have to put it in is how you would make your wall hanging. Okay, so, and like I said, this is a sample of my boots here. I've used the outline with the marker, and these are also, this is also marker inside. And on this square I've used the concho and I've used the studs. So I kind of tried to do a sample of each one in my little wall hanging.
Get 3 months free access on all lines plus a new 4G smartphone for only $4.99 a month. 2 great offers with Valley Cellular. Call Valley today at 437-2615 to take advantage of this great deal.
Okay, to put this square into a wall hanging, I am going to use the 2.5 inch strip, and I'm going to put it to the side of each block. So we will take my sewing machine, and we are going to take these strips, and I've cut strips ahead of time because then you can just continually sew your strips. So then you put your right sides together, and what I would do is I would take, well, I guess it depends on how you're going to make your block too, because if you're going to do a rectangle, then you would do the tops. If you're going to do a square, then I would do the sides first and make like a row. So it depends on how you're going to finish your quilt on where you want your strips. This one we're going to make like a square. So then I would take my strip and put it on the side and take it to my sewing machine and do about 1/4 inch. And I like to backstitch it first to seal the end, just a stitch or 2, and then sew all the way down the side. Okay, and then you just continue to put your blocks together depending on how you want your, if you want a wall hanging, or if you want a long one, or if you want a square. Okay, so that's what you continue to do. So then once you, on this one, I've sewn the strip here to strip here to strip, and then I sewed this block to this piece. And then when I get to the length I want, then I take my long strip and sew it on each end. And if you don't have strips long enough, you can sew 2 strips together to make the long strip. And that's what, for this one, is how this one was made. Okay. On this smaller one, I sewed my strips on each end and then sewed the blocks together and made a row. And then what I did is I sewed a longer strip on the top and in between and on the bottom. And then you make it whatever size, however big you want it. So if you wanted 2 more on this, you could add another row of 2 and then make sure you just put a strip on the bottom to kind of make it more complete. Okay, so then once we get this finished size, I'm going to take these other things out of the way here. And for cutting the squares and the strips, it's easier if you have like a cutting board like this. It's a self-healing cutting board. And then there's different size rulers. So depending, like this one here, I use for my 2.5-inch strips. This one works really nice. You can find the edge of your 2.5 and then use your rotary cutter to cut your strips accordingly. And so there's different sizes of these for the different size blocks or strips you're going to make. And the more you make them, the more comfortable you get with using that tool. Okay, so once we have all our squares made and we've got our wall hanging, then we will have to put it together.
Blazing fast broadband internet from Valley is now available and better than ever. Let us help you decide which speed is best for you. The 50 meg speed would be sufficient for 1 to 4 devices, mainly emailing and surfing the web. Our 100 meg speed works great for 5 to 8 devices and multiple users streaming and downloading video. If you have 8 devices or more that are simultaneously streaming or gaming, or if you have a medium-sized business, the 250 meg speed would work best for you. For extreme heavy home or work from home use, or if you have a medium to large business using 15 or more devices, you may want to consider our 500 meg download speed to fit your needs. And if you're a home or business that needs it all, we have our 1000 meg, 1 gig broadband internet speed. Call our office today at 437-2615 and talk with one of our staff members to pick the speed that's best for you.
Once we have our piece sewn together, and this is going to be my wall hanging, I need a backing for it. So then I just take and find a big piece. In this one I happen to have a bigger piece of blue jean. So then I just lay it out and cut it out accordingly. Okay, so that it's the same size or a little bit bigger than the backing. And then what I'm going to do is I can still use these 2.5-inch strips that I use for my sashings or my little pieces in between here. And then what we're going to do is I usually fold these. Well, first of all, we're going to cut this so that it's the same size. Okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna, for this one here, we've got the side is the same size, and then we're gonna take this 2.5-inch piece and we're gonna do a binding. Now, to bind all the way around without having to stop, I would measure all the way around it and then add 10 inches just to have a little bit of a leeway. Okay, then that total that you get is how long a strip you're gonna need. So you just keep sewing pieces together. There's a couple different ways. You can either just sew them together and you'll have a straight, or there's a way of taking your pieces and laying them crosswise, sewing across here, and then it will have like a diagonal line. So it just depends on how the look that you want. Today I'm just gonna use this small sample here. And then what I do is I fold the two right sides or the wrong sides together. And then what we would do is we would take and sew, and I would not start like at an end because you're gonna have to put the two ends together. So if you kind of start, I would maybe like start at the bottom, but today I'm just gonna start at the side here. And then I guess I'll just take it to my sewing machine. Normally I would pin it, and then we'll just take it over to the sewing machine and use my 1/4-inch seam, and then I'm gonna sew it a ways here just to kind of show you. And what we would do too here, make sure, I don't know if I told you this or not, we want the wrong sides together, so we have the right side on the back when we flip it over. So when we're sewing the binding, we'll just do 1/4 of an inch, and I'm gonna sew it a little ways here, and then I'll show you what we'll do. Okay. So what we would do is we would sew this binding all the way around until we get over, and we would have a space here with a little bit hanging on each side. And then what we would do to finish this is we would turn this over and flip it around, and then we would hand stitch it to make it complete. On this one here, what I did is I took my strips and I just folded them inside and top stitched all the way around. So there's a couple different ways that you can finish these. But on this way, you would have to hand stitch, or if you're really good at it, you could stitch this with the machine, but then you got to be careful so that you hide the stitch in the front. Okay? So this is kind of a quick overview on how to make a couple different wall hangings with these blue jeans and embellishing it. If you have any questions or suggestions, or if you'd like to be a host on the show, please call me at 437-2615. I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you.